All right, breaking news. The U.S. State Department is ordering the closure of the Chinese consulate in Houston. You're looking at live pictures of that consulate right now for what the State Department describes as massive illegal spying and interfering in domestic politics. Now, China is vowing to retaliate. Joining me now is Independent Senator Angus King of Maine. He serves on the Intelligence Committee. Senator King, thank you for being with us as a member of the Intelligence Committee. I don't know if you've seen more than we have. What's the State Department talking about here, and what do you make of this development?
Well, I think there are a couple things. Number one, this is a dangerous moment, John, as the confrontation between our two countries continues to escalate. Number two, I know of no recent intelligence of particular Chinese activities, either with regard to our elections or the whole confrontation between our two countries, theft of intellectual property. And that's what sort of bothers me about this is the timing. We've known about Chinese. I mean, they hacked the Office of Personnel Management 5 or 6 years ago. They've been stealing intellectual property for 20 years. There certainly is a good reason to confront China. My concern is escalating this tension. Is it really about confronting China, or does it have something to do with an election in 4 months? The president keeps talking about the Chinese virus and linking Joe Biden to China. This is a dangerous game. Here's a new term for you, John, the Thucydides trap. And what that's all about is the tension between a rising power and a dominant power. In 16 of the times that you've had that situation in world history, going back to the ancient Greeks, 12 have resulted in wars. So the question is, can we avoid the Thucydides trap with China? And it's going to require some really deft diplomacy and military power and deterrence and all of those factors. But I guess my question would be, and my question will be today, when I talk with my colleagues on the Intelligence Committee, is there any particular data, is there any particular information that is behind this new action? I'm all for confronting China, but it has to be done in a serious, thoughtful, non-domestic politics kind of way.
I see your Thucydides, by the way. The strong do as they will and the weak suffer as they must. I'm on Sparta's side as far as that goes.
Beautiful.
Senator King, there are reports that the Chinese and the consulate are burning documents over the last several hours in Houston. Why would that be?
Well, that's what happens. That happens when we close Russian consulates and when they close ours. If there are confidential documents and they know that the building that they're operating out of is going to become essentially available to Americans, that's what they're going to do. And look, I don't want to minimize what the Chinese are, I think, on a very dangerous path themselves. They've just essentially put a chokehold on Hong Kong. What they're doing with the Uyghurs is unconscionable, and their sort of aggressiveness around the world, what they're doing in the South China Sea. So I don't want to sound like I'm whitewashing them at all. And I'm sure there are documents in that building that they're burning that they don't want us to get a hold of. But again, I think one of the issues here, John, is this ought to be handled on a worldwide basis with allies instead of a one-to-one kind of confrontation, and that seems to be where we're headed.
On the subject of intelligence and on the subject of possible hacks and meddling, Democratic leaders, including on the Intelligence Committee, have asked the FBI to brief all members on alleged new Russian attacks or plans for attacks on the election system. As a member, again, of the Intelligence Committee, what can you tell us about what the Russians are doing or planning?
Well, I can't tell you anything specific based upon intelligence that I've seen, but I can tell you, number one, we know to a certainty that they meddled in a very serious way. In fact, meddle is far too weak a word. They interfered in our election in 2016, and there are indications that they're going to continue that path in 2020. For example, in 2016, we know that they penetrated virtually every state's electoral system, their database and that kind of thing. They didn't seem to do anything. There was no evidence they changed votes, but they weren't doing that for fun, John. They were practicing. And that's a concern. We're having a hearing later today with the Rules Committee on preparation for elections. I think the states are much more vulnerable than they believe that they are. So are the Russians going to try to meddle in our election in 2020? Absolutely. Why wouldn't they? They were wildly successful in 2016. But it also may be the Chinese, the Iranians, the North Koreans. This kind of cyber crime and cyber meddling is pretty cheap. Putin can hire 8,000 hackers for the cost of one jet airplane. So this is something that they're going to continue to do, and we have to continue to defend ourselves.
Senator King, I want to ask you about the pandemic, if I can. Just before this interview, I had a chance to speak to Judge Cortez from Hidalgo County, Texas, who said he needs more testing, and that a neighboring county judge told him he doesn't have the money to procure the supplies for the testing that they need. There are billions of dollars in unspent, appropriated federal money for testing. How can it be that there's billions of dollars sitting around and it's not getting to Hidalgo County, Texas, as people are waiting days to get results?
Well, and how can it be that the administration has told the Republican caucus, apparently, from what we're hearing, they don't want any more money in the new coronavirus bill for testing? Look, there's no secret. The president's been saying since the very beginning, that first couple of weeks, he said, I don't want that ship to dock because it's going to change our numbers. He's been focused on testing as something that he thinks is bad because it shows cases. That's like saying, don't do mammograms because, it turns up cancer cases. Doesn't cause it, but it's detecting it. The testing is a scandal. The failure of the testing regime going back, and I heard Dr. Gupta this morning talking about it. This is the signal failure, and the problem is, John, there was a sort of a deal. There was a contract between the American people. We're going to shut down. Lots of jobs are going to be lost. The economic pain is going to be tremendous. But in the meantime, you develop the tools to help us get out of this safely. The primary one is testing. They didn't do it. The president yesterday said they're developing a policy. Holy smoke. That's what you did or should have done in January or February. Their policy thus far can be summarized very easily. Shift and shaft. Shift the responsibilities to the states and then don't provide them with the necessary tools in order to meet those responsibilities. This was a federal responsibility from the beginning, particularly in developing a national testing program. They failed to do it, and now here we are in a totally predictable crisis that everybody said was going to happen if we didn't have the widespread testing, and it's tragic what's going on in places like South Texas or Florida, and even many other states are now on the rise.
Senator King, I want to ask you very quickly about a story in the New York Times this morning, which reports that the U.S. ambassador to the United Kingdom, was pressured by the president to ask the British to use influence to get the British Open, one of the premier golf tournaments in the world, moved to a Trump resort in Scotland, Turnberry. I'm wondering if you have a reaction to that.
Well, if it's true, it's shocking, but I don't get shocked very much anymore. Why would you be surprised by this when the president himself tried to bring the G7 conference to one of his resorts in Florida? I mean, that's one of the things that's been surprising about this presidency. The president never divested himself of his business interests. He said, well, my boys are going to run it, but he still owns it. So if Turnberry makes a couple of $1 million, that's a couple of $1 million to him. So, like I say, it's shocking, except it's consistent with the pattern. Trump Hotel in Washington is consistently making money because of the influence of the administration. So, we shouldn't be numb to this, John. It's not right.
Senator Angus King, it's great to have you on this morning. Thanks so much for being with us. Be well.
Glad to be with you. Thanks, John.